Welcome to Laguna Presbyterian Church. I'm Kathy Sizer. I'm the associate pastor here. And my guest today is Patty Mouton. She is going to be talking to us about how we can handle a situation that has come up in our church and that could easily come up in any of our lives. I became aware recently of a young family in our church, both of their parents, the parents of the man, they both became very ill very quickly with COVID. Neither of them is able to make any decisions for themselves. They can't talk. One of them's on a ventilator, the other one is close to it. So their adult children are left having not only make decisions about their health care, but also about finances. And the trouble is, they don't have any permission on paper that gives them a way to do that. So they are having a terrible time. They're spending a lot of money out of their own pockets because they don't have permission to access the parents' money in order to pay their bills, in order to pay the mortgage, all sorts of stuff. So I started asking people, what can we do so that we can be ready for this, especially in these COVID times when it would be very possible that both I and my husband at the same time could be out of commission quite quickly. And I found out that you have to get an advanced paper, advanced work. It can be fairly easy to do it for both medical and for financial. So actually, we went online and we downloaded a form that was a medical form and that was a financial form. We filled them out. We decided who in the family we wanted to be the first, second, third to make decisions for us. And we got them notarized. And we've got our kids notified that they're the ones to do this. But I also asked around to say, can I get an expert to talk about this? Because that's all I know right there. You've heard about the whole thing that I know. And when I asked Hoag Health Ministries at our Hoag Parish nurse people, our representative at Hoag, they said, oh yeah, we've got exactly the person that you want to have talk about this. And that is Patty. Patty wears two hats. She works at Hoag, and she is the program director for community education for Hoag Palliative Care. She also works for the Alzheimer's Association of Orange County, but she doesn't just work with people who have dementia, and so she is a vice president there. And she's spoken before to our deacons, and she is absolutely a wealth of information. So, Patty, tell us especially about the healthcare portion of this.
Sure. Thank you so much for the invitation. It's really lovely to be here. Nobody really likes to talk about advanced care planning. No matter how we feel about life and death or the hereafter or whatever our faith traditions are, we don't like to contemplate our own mortality. So today we're going to talk a little bit about why it's important to have an advanced healthcare directive, excuse me, and the companion document for some people, the POLST, and sort of the process by which families can institute something like this in their households and make sure that everybody in the family is adequately covered and protected.
So when you say everybody in the family, so not just old people, right?
No, not just old people. Actually, every person over the age of 18 really ought to have an advanced healthcare directive. Maybe when they're 18, 19, or 20, they don't really have any money, so the financial is not quite as important, but the healthcare directive is critically important. I don't know about you, Kathy, but I raised teenagers, and the people with whom they were hanging out when they were 18, 19, or 20, even 21, would not be the ones I would want making life and death decisions in a healthcare crisis.
So how could it happen that way?
Well, let's say your son or daughter is off at college and they get into some sort of an accident, and the person that drives them to the emergency room is their sweetheart of all of 6 weeks, who says, I'm his partner for life. And then the emergency department personnel start to take that person's word and judgment in terms of planning care, unless there's an advanced healthcare directive, and then they know to notify parents, and they can share medical information and still be in compliance with the HIPAA confidentiality laws.
Okay, yeah.
So it's a really important thing. anybody over the age of 18 needs to have an advanced healthcare directive for their protection and to make sure that their family understands what they would want. We have a vision in this program. We want to be sure that people receive the kind of medical care that is congruent and in alignment with their expressed goals, with their values, with what they would want as priorities in the time of the accident or illness. So in order to do that, people have to talk about it, and then if they really want things followed, then they have to put it on paper. I know that in this congregation, there's just a wealth of neighborly love and really wonderful care for one another. I've witnessed it. I've lived in this area for 35 years, and I've had many, many friends that were part of the Laguna Presbyterian family. We are all called to care for one another. We are all called to pray with one another. We are called to provide support. And we all must frame this call not as something that's a burden, but that it's a gift to be able to share information, to provide support, to bring a casserole, to drive someone to a doctor's appointment. Whatever it is that we're called to do, it's a gift that we're allowed to be able to participate in helping someone's well-being. And I've lived in Orange County since I was a little bitty girl. I was actually born here. We are a society of planners. I don't know one bride I've ever met that didn't have a checklist. We plan for vacations. We plan for when the baby's going to come. We plan for retirement. We have our IRA and our 401k, and we have everything all set. We are planners. How many of us plan for a catastrophic illness or death? Very few. Yet that's one thing that is universal. We may not all get COVID. We may not all get to be 80 or 85 years old, but we are all going to die. A very wise person once said to me that this mortal body is built for planned obsolescence. So we should plan for what's going to happen when we can no longer use this body. And as I said before, everyone over the age of 18 should have an advanced healthcare directive. It's easy to do. It's not cumbersome. It does not have to be notarized. It's a good idea, but it's not required. And it really just protects everybody involved so that mom and dad or whomever that young adult wants to be in charge of their decisions regarding healthcare knows that they're in charge and knows what the person's wishes are. I have run into so many families who say, I don't need to do anything like that. I'm healthy. I'm a vegetarian. I run. They say, oh, that's not going to happen to me. Or my family will know what to do. They know me well enough. Many people say, I don't want to think about this, because they're under the notion that if they think about it and talk about it, they might just speak it into being. Well, we know that's not the case. Sometimes people say, I don't know where to begin. What do I do first? Well, part of what we're doing here today is to talk about what to do first and how to formulate your wishes for care, talk about it with your family, and then put the right kind of paperwork in place. Your doctor will not be the one to tell you when it's time. If you wait until your physician says it's time to have an advance directive, I guarantee you it's too late. So we want you to be prepared. We called this little program, Keep Your Lamps Trimmed and Burning, because those are the kinds of people who have what they need in a crisis. And what we're learning through this crisis in COVID is that preparation, conversation, and anticipating what could go wrong really will help us as we move through this pandemic and get to the other side of health. We can't put our heads in the sand. It doesn't help anybody. And I think it's really staggering when we consider that more than 50% of us, when faced with a healthcare crisis, are not able to make decisions for ourselves. We're either too sick, we're unconscious, something has happened and we can't speak for ourselves. Now that may resolve and we might get better, but in the moment of crisis, we can't speak for ourselves. Pardon me. And you don't want to be making decisions about what kind of care you want as the paramedics are speeding up to whisk you away to the hospital. It's not fair to anybody if, as you're getting into the life flight evacuation helicopter, somebody says, "Oh, I don't think she wants CPR." That should have been taken care of well upstream. So let's think about this. It's not so scary, and it's really a part of life. I don't think anyone here or anyone watching is without knowing someone who has been terribly touched by this tragedy of COVID. We all know families that have been devastated by the death or serious illness of a loved one, or maybe they're breathing a sigh of relief because, yes, my aunt was really sick, but now she's getting well. She didn't have to go to the hospital. She didn't need a ventilator. COVID has taught us that we are much more fragile than we recognize.
And it all happens much faster than we expect.
Much faster. Yeah. The change in condition is sometimes just mind-boggling. Somebody can be doing pretty well for 3 or 4 or 5 days, and on day 7, all of a sudden, they just have a crash, and they need serious medical attention. That's happened time and time again. So it's really important that we embrace these lessons of COVID and kind of put them into the framework for advanced care planning for under regular times. Most people would like to talk to their doctor about their end-of-life care wishes. There's been many, many studies, but we know that the majority of people really would like to have had a conversation with a healthcare professional who knows them, whom they trust, so that they can kind of, bounce things around and kind of talk about, well, what if? Well, what if I needed this? People want to talk about it. But most of the time, physicians don't have a lot of time, that wonderful commodity. And because most people are averse to talking about end-of-life issues, the doctors aren't necessarily going to be the ones to bring it up. So why should we plan in advance? What's important about it? Well, if I were to ask you, Kathy, how would you define heroic medical measures? What would you say?
Feeding tube, CPR,
Okay.
a ventilator, which now I would want.
Okay. Right.
So if I'd been filling out something 5 years ago and I'd said nothing heroic or, oh, no, not a ventilator, that wouldn't be applicable now.
It wouldn't serve you well based on how you feel right now and with this particular health situation we're facing with COVID. You're exactly right. And that's also why once people have completed these documents, it's really important that they be revisited periodically, at least every 5 years. But certainly if there's any change in condition, any change of where you live, somebody in your life, maybe your spouse dies, there's a divorce, any major life change, review these important documents and maybe make some adjustments. But great point.
I noticed on the form that we had, there was a box that said, I don't want anybody to make any decisions until my personal physician signs off to say that I'm not able to do it. But I did not check that box because my personal physician is not going to be at Hoag when I'm at Hoag in the emergency room. She's got her own practice she's running. It's going to be somebody else taking care of me.
Precisely. You might have a hospitalist. You might have somebody from the emergency department who's caring for you. Your own personal physician might themselves be ill if there's another pandemic. They might be on vacation and you can't reach them. They're in Machu Picchu or, some parts unknown. So we don't want to limit those kinds of things. But that's a really important point. We asked people, have you ever had a doctor ask you about your wishes for treatment at the end of life. And very, very few have had that, even though the overwhelming majority say they want the conversation. So part of our purpose here with this program is to say, next time you see your doctor, ask the questions. Say, let's talk about this. And interestingly enough, Medicare provides a billing code so that if you call and make an appointment to talk to your doctor about your end-of-life care wishes, the doctor can schedule enough time and can bill appropriately for it. So it's, no harm, no foul. Everybody gets appropriate care, consideration, time, and compensation for these conversations. We want you to think about what would happen if you had a serious illness. And no, we don't want to wish it into being. We don't want to be gloom and doom at all. But let's face it, at some point, every single one of us is going to be faced with some kind of health crisis or some challenge. So we want people to think about and reflect what would be important to me if I were seriously ill and heading toward end of life. What would quality of life mean to me? What do my own faith tradition and values and personal goals of care mean in this equation? Then we want you to talk to your loved ones about it, because even when you have very recalcitrant family members who say, "Mom, I don't want to talk about that. That's awful. Oh, it's macabre, morose. I don't want to talk about it." We have to kind of get them past that and say, well, it would be worse if you didn't know how I would want my care orchestrated. And wouldn't you feel awful if you did the wrong thing?
Yeah, it's a gift to your children or a gift to your parents.
Absolutely.
Each direction, yeah.
Right, it is multidirectional, absolutely. We want you to choose the person who would speak for you in the event you can't speak for yourself. Now remember, we said that more than 50% of us cannot speak for ourselves in a healthcare crisis. So this becomes a really important role for somebody close to you to know that they are your healthcare agent or proxy or power of attorney for healthcare. There's many different names for it. It's all the same role. And that they understand what your wishes would be and that they're up for the task. So we have to tell people about it. I had a situation not long ago where a colleague, a social worker, was on a trip with her sisters and they were having a really nice vacation. And tragically, she tripped on concrete steps, hit her head, had a very, very traumatic brain injury, and whisked away to the emergency department on a ventilator. And everybody looks around and says, "We don't know what to do." She did have an advanced healthcare directive, and she had named someone to speak for her. But her advance directive was safely locked in the file cabinet of her attorney's office. Oh. Her attorney was playing golf in Cabo, and nobody knew whom she had named as her healthcare proxy. So it took about 4 days to finally get to that information and then be able to sort through and know what her wishes would have been in this kind of a really tragic situation. It was agony for those 4 days for her sisters and for all the people who knew and loved her, because they knew that the care she was getting was probably not what she would have wanted, but they were powerless to do anything else. So fill out your paperwork, share it with people, talk to people, and most importantly, tell the person that you're choosing to be your healthcare agent that you are choosing them. Make sure they're willing and up for the task.
So it sounds like I also need to make a copy of whatever I fill out.
Absolutely.
And make sure they have it. And it doesn't have to be the original.
Doesn't have to be the original. Copies, faxes, screenshots, all of these things are adequate. And you do want to make copies for everybody. You may want to give one to your next door neighbor. Maybe you don't even like them that much, but they might be the ones to call 911 for you.
Oh, yeah, sure.
They need to know who to call to make decisions for you. It's just really important that you copy everybody. Many people even keep a copy in their glove compartment in their car in case they're in an auto accident. At home, the paramedics are trained to look for a magneted document on the refrigerator because that's where important papers should be. Or right in the drawer right near the telephone that's in the kitchen, if you still have a landline. It's just a really good idea to copy everybody that might then need to know who you've chosen and what your wishes are. So think about it. Think about what's most important to you. Think about how you would start these conversations. We suggest that you read books like your group read Being Mortal last year. There's a wonderful movie about it. There's a TED Talk by Dr. B.J. Miller, who just does a wonderful job of helping people put all of this into perspective. There's a great documentary film called Endgame. So there are many, many different tools that people can use in order to get the conversation started. And sometimes you need something like that just to be able to trigger the conversation with your family members so they don't say, oh no, I don't want to talk about it. You can say, well, I saw this movie or read this book. Or my next door neighbor had a healthcare crisis and I don't want what happened to her to happen to me. So use what's going on in life in order to initiate those conversations with family. Then talk about it. Tell people what's important to you. Talk about whether or not you want CPR. Use COVID as a touchstone to get that conversation off the ground and be able to say, too many people have become seriously ill very quickly. I want you to know what you should do if this should happen to me right now. We're all going to be careful. We're going to do all the right things, but we just don't know what might happen coming around the corner. So use those conversation starters and discuss what you think is important and talk about different scenarios. Maybe you have family history of somebody who languished in bed with a feeding tube for 10 years. Maybe you have family history of someone who received CPR, but it wasn't very successful and the whole ordeal was pretty gruesome and excruciating. Talk about your values. And in context of a faith-based tradition, why are we here? We're here on this earth, if we believe in Christian tradition, that we're going on to something even better. So we have to kind of weave that into our thought process as well, that just because we die doesn't mean that everything is over.
Sure.
And death is not the worst possible thing that could happen to us. There are many tools like the Conversation Project. There are many guides, and we can help you with that. I can make sure that Laguna Presbyterian has some handouts ready for people. So if they wanted to do something privately, if they wanted to have help, that help is available through Hoag Health Ministries. We're pretty flexible, and we'll help you wherever we can.
Oh, that's great.
Then the next thing they need to do is choose that person. So who do you choose to be your healthcare decision maker, your proxy? Well, it has to be somebody who's willing to do it and could speak for you. Don't pick the person who is the most reluctant to speak up. It has to be somebody that has a little strength, that would know how to navigate the system a little bit, that could speak up in case there were differing opinions. That's an important thing. And you have to trust them so that they could carry out your wishes, even if it was not necessarily in alignment with theirs. Exactly.
Well, and but you also pick alternates.
You can pick alternates, yes.
Like my spouse is my first one, but one of my children and then my other child.
Yes, and that's actually a really good idea because as we have seen, anything's possible. In my family, in my household, I am married to maybe the nicest guy on the planet, but he is not my first choice for my healthcare proxy. My daughter is an advanced practice nurse. And she's my proxy. Number one, because she knows what I would want. She understands all the clinical stuff. None of it would be daunting to her. She would understand what the doctors were saying. And she could then carry out what she knows would be important to me. My husband would sit bedside, and if I twitched, he'd say, she's coming back, no matter what the doctors had said. So my daughter is the first line to make decisions for me, and my husband is second with her help. So we have it pretty well worked out. But I think he was surprised when I said, no, I don't want to put that burden on you. The clinical information isn't familiar to you. It would be not only stressful, but a little scary. So let's use what we have in the family.
That's great.
You want to choose someone who's at least 18 years old. It can't be a child. They have to be of majority, an adult. They have to be willing to speak on your behalf. They have to know you well. They don't have to be a relative. But it has to be somebody that your relatives would listen to and, knows the family dynamics, knows that they really could stand in advocacy for you and your wishes.
I hear especially difficulties with this when there's been a remarriage.
Yes.
But paperwork hasn't been changed.
Correct.
Oh, what a mess.
Yes. A mess is a polite way of saying it. It is very, very excruciating on family members when they think things should be one way and the paperwork doesn't support it. So it happens. People are widowed, they remarry. People are divorced, they remarry. When we have blended families, that's another trigger to review all of this important paperwork and make sure that it has been adjusted accordingly. Great point. Thank you. Then you complete the documents. Well, the first and most important for everybody over 18 is the advance directive. That's the document that names the person who speaks for you in the event you can't speak for yourself.
And I think that's all I did. Mm-hmm. And I got it done in 2 seconds.
Wonderful.
Very quick.
Great. Some people might also need something called a POLST document. And the POLST stands for Physician Order for Life-Sustaining Treatment. It is a companion to the advance directive. It doesn't, it's not something you do one or the other. You need both if you fall into a certain category of having a serious illness, perhaps at advanced age, perhaps medical frailty. So an advance directive is to name the person who speaks for you. The POLST is then to very specifically codify your medical wishes in a medical legal order that is signed by a doctor. This whole process is a conversation. It's an examination of your values and your goals of care. It's a process that is fluid and dynamic and might change over time. But we really want people to get comfortable in the process. And we want people to then identify what's important to them now, whom would be most important to make these decisions, and then to facilitate this process of getting this paperwork all completed appropriately. The advance directives are written legal documents. The differences are the advance healthcare directive is for future care wishes, suggestions about care. In an advance directive, someone might say, well, I don't want heroic measures. Again, how do you define heroic measures? Your heroism might be different than mine.
And heroism in COVID days might not be the same as heroism at other times.
Exactly.
I might other times say, don't put me on a ventilator.
Right.
But with COVID, that's important.
Or I might say, I never want to be on a feeding tube, except maybe I get esophageal cancer. And the doctor says 6 weeks of radiation and 2 months of chemotherapy, we're going to get you back to normal. In the meantime, I can't eat. So I better say a feeding tube is all right.
Right.
So all of this could change depending upon your medical circumstances, what's going on. But the advance directive is suggestions for care in the future.
Okay.
I might put in my advance directive, I don't want carnations at the funeral. That's a suggestion, okay? But that's not a
Legal.
special legal medical order, okay? Advance directives are communication, and it tells whom would speak for you if you couldn't speak for yourself. They are not prescriptions, they are not plans of care, and even if you put in your advance directive, do not resuscitate, that's not a medical legal order. That's just a suggestion.
Oh, okay.
And it shows where your preferences lie, but it's not something, for example, that the paramedics could rely on. If you have a cardiac arrest and the paramedics are called and all that's there is an advance healthcare directive, they must initiate life support. Okay. They're required by law to do that if you only have an advance directive on premises. So that's why the two documents, the advance directive and the POLST, differ, and for certain circumstances, they're both appropriate.
But the POLST takes a lot more time, and it's much more complex to fill out.
It certainly is, and it requires a conversation with a healthcare professional, a physician, a physician's assistant, a nurse practitioner. That's a really important conversation, and in order to be legal, it must be signed not only by the patient or their legal representative, but also by the licensed healthcare practitioner.
Okay.
In California, there's no one form that says this is the advance directive. You can download them from the internet.
That's what I did. Yeah.
Your hospital could have them. There's a document called the 5 Wishes that's very conversational that we like a lot. Your attorney might have one. So there's a variety of different advanced healthcare directives that are legal in the state of California. When you are completing your advanced healthcare directive, you're going to think about your treatment wishes. You're going to put that in context of your personal values and goals for care, which could change depending upon where you are in life, where you are in your illness, and what else is happening in the world. It identifies your surrogate decision maker, someone who speaks for you when you cannot, sometimes called your agent. And you write this down on the advance directive form. It can be witnessed by 2 people who sign the form as you sign it, validating that it's you making that statement.
I did that once. I ran around to my neighbors and had them sign it, yeah.
Perfect. Or you can have it notarized. It's not required that it be notarized, but it's not a bad idea either. And then you should talk to your loved ones. I'm going to say this again. Tell everybody what you've put in your advance directive. Tell them whom you've chosen to be your agent, and then make and distribute copies for everybody involved. Witnessing requirements are important if you're going to have people witness your signature. They shouldn't be your relatives. They shouldn't be people that are at all involved in your care. If you live in an assisted living building, it shouldn't be anybody that works there. So you want to make sure that these are very impartial people, but can still attest that you are who you say you are when you sign. Then we talk about the POLST. This is a very specific document, and it's used across the country in a little more than 36, 38 states now have something similar. Stands for Physician Orders for Life-Sustaining Treatment. And it's specifically so that a healthcare provider and the patient can get together on exactly what specific care someone would want in a given situation, and then put it into a medical legal form that must be followed by first responders, paramedics, emergency department staff. It becomes a legal order, and people are bound to abide by what's in the POLST. And as with any advanced care planning forms, we encourage the more conversation, the better. The more you kind of pick things through and hash things out, it's really a good idea, and maybe have someone who is familiar with medical and clinical kinds of situations kind of help you understand what each of the sections means and what implications it might have for you. We say that the POLST is really only for people who have a serious chronic medical illness, perhaps are of advanced age, and are medically frail. I use the story about my mother. We lost my mother last year. She was 97, and she had been in really pretty robust, good health up until just a few weeks before she died. People said, "Does your mother need a POLST?" I said, "Well, she's pretty healthy. There's no indication that she's going to die soon, but she's 97. So would you be surprised if she didn't make it to 98? If the answer is no, then that person could be appropriate to have a POLST form. I'm 64. I'm in pretty good health. I don't need a POLST because everybody would be surprised if I died before my 65th birthday because I don't have anything percolating that would cause me to be medically frail or compromised.
Sure.
But if I had stage 4 cancer, even if I was doing well and maybe my cancer was going into remission, I still might need a POLST because it wouldn't be surprising if the cancer came back and I didn't make it to age 65. So these are the kinds of barometers we use when determining whether or not somebody needs a POLST. The POLST allows people to really specifically choose medical treatments that they want to receive, that are congruent with their values and with their goals of care.
So like what would be an example of that?
Well, an example would be CPR. Now, today, if I have cardiac arrest, I was ever so happy to see that you have an automatic external defibrillator on the campus.
From Hoag.
Absolutely. If I have cardiac arrest here today, I want somebody to do CPR, shock me, and get me back. Because the likelihood of somebody my age and my health status coming back to my level of functionality is very good.
Yeah.
But fast forward 25 years, when I am medically frail, when maybe I've had a heart attack or I've had a couple of cancer episodes, and 25 years from now, I'm pretty compromised. If I have cardiac arrest and we try CPR and we zap me with the AED machine, you might get my heart beating again. But the chances of me coming back to the level of functionality before the cardiac arrest are quite low. And if you even put it in context, if I have my cardiac arrest when I'm 85 or 90 years old in the hospital, and they call the code and the crash cart comes, and they do everything, and they start CPR, and they shock me, my chances of living to be discharged from the hospital, even if they brought me back, are very, very low, something less than 5%. So it's not a panacea. It's not magical. CPR works on healthy people. On compromised people, it's not quite so great. We might get a heartbeat, but they may have been deprived of oxygen for too long, or they may not ever come back to their same or even close to their level of functionality. And it's pretty brutal. It's not like on TV. I'm kind of a devotee of binge watching Grey's Anatomy. I love the medical shows. And it doesn't happen that you have cardiac arrest, they call the code, the crash cart comes, they shock you and they pound on their chest, pound, pound, pound. Before the end of the episode, you're not sitting up having a cheeseburger and a beer across the street. It's brutal. Bones break, the sternum gets broken, it's painful, and it may not have the desired outcome. So we have to think about that pretty carefully. Today, I want CPR. 25 years from now, I don't think so. And for my mother, at 97 and 89 pounds, if we had tried to do CPR on her, it would have been an excruciating disaster. So it's all in context. We want you to document what your wishes are for now. Do we want to attempt cardiopulmonary resuscitation? otherwise known as CPR? Do we want a mechanical ventilator, a tube all the way down your throat into your lungs to force you to keep breathing? Well, under certain circumstances, perhaps. Right now, with COVID, many people go on the ventilator, and if they started out with a robust good health, they're likely to do okay, be able to come off the ventilator and get well. But there's a very high percentage of older people who get COVID, need to go on the ventilator, and they do not recover. It's something like 88%. So we have to look at it in context. Do you want to try? Okay, then we'll try, but maybe not. Because if you're one of that 88% that is not going to get well, that means your last days on the planet are spent in the ICU, not being able to speak or eat or be with your family. There's some limitations. So we have to think about it in context of what's going on medically. Maybe antibiotics and IV fluids are considered a little bit extraordinary in some kinds of situations.
Really?
Well, let's say that I have end-stage dementia. I'm 89 years old. I've been ill with Alzheimer's type dementia for 10 years, and gradually my brain has forgotten how to do many, many things. All my body functions are controlled by that brain that is diseased. And one of the long-term effects of end-stage dementia is this forgetting how to swallow. We just can no longer take in enough food and fluid to sustain life. Even if we start IVs and pump that person full of artificial hydration, that's not going to stop the trajectory of the disease. And in the process, it might cause more problems than it's seeking to solve. So there may be times when things like IV fluids are considered pretty extraordinary and maybe aren't going to positively impact the outcome. So we have to think about that. What about providing medical nutrition by tube, a feeding tube that we surgically implant into your stomach? For some situations, that might be absolutely appropriate. Again, if I have esophageal cancer and I can't eat for a few months, then that feeding tube is my lifeline.
And I'm hearing it about some COVID patients, too.
Yes, yes, absolutely.
Especially on a vent.
Right. When you're on a ventilator, you can't eat, so you have to have IV fluids and artificial nutrition. That's just part of the protocol. But let's say, again, I have end-stage dementia and I really cannot take in enough food that would give me enough nutrition to sustain life. I can sit there and try and feed someone all day long, and their body is just not going to absorb the nutrients and not be able to process it properly. And maybe we're just annoying this poor person who really has no desire to eat anymore. I am of the philosophy that in that kind of situation, we always offer comfort feeding, a little tiny bite of ice cream, the meringue off the top of love a meringue pie, maybe a little teeny tiny bit of cookie dough, something that's going to give pleasure, that's going to create this nutritional healing connection between two people, but it's not necessarily designed to provide them with enough nutrition to sustain life. The nature of the disease is what's taking the person's life. Most of the time, it's not that somebody is starving to death, it's that their body can no longer process food. So in those kinds of situations, at end-stage dementia, for example, a surgically implanted feeding tube really is not going to change the outcome, and it really will cause problems that are painful and problematic, infections and so forth. So we have to weigh burden versus benefit of treatment. What do we hope to get out of it? What's the burden of the treatment? Is it going to be painful? Do we expect it's going to have some success? What are we expecting? The POLST is never mandatory. It's always a voluntary document. And I actually have heard of people who go in for a knee replacement, and then they're going to go to a skilled nursing rehab for a week or so to get a lot of physical therapy, and somebody wants to have them sign a POLST document. Wholly inappropriate, not appropriate at all, and not required. But once a POLST is executed, signed by the patient or the patient's representative or agent, and by the licensed clinical professional, physician, nurse practitioner, or physician assistant, now it's a medical legal order. And unless there's really good reason to provide oversight of that medical judgment, it must be followed. It's a legal order. It's pink. It's a bright, obnoxious pink, and that's really so that people will recognize that this is different from other papers in a chart. Now, a copy, a photocopy, a screenshot, a scanned copy, all are legal.
Even of the POLST?
Even of the POLST,
Wow.
Yes, absolutely. But it's nice if the original is available because it's so obnoxiously pink. It's not intended to replace the advance directive. It works in harmony. The person noted in the advance directive as your agent can fill out the POLST on your behalf if you can't speak for yourself. So it's a pretty significant responsibility. And it must be followed by first responders and emergency personnel unless there's some extraordinary good reason for medical judgment to override it. Both the advance directive and the POLST are legal documents, but they each have different purpose. And I think that's what's important for us to remember. And I'm just going to run through very quickly the sections on the POLST. It gives you an opportunity to choose, would you want us to attempt cardiopulmonary resuscitation or CPR? And, some people say, yes, attempt it. Some people say do not. But if we attempt cardiopulmonary resuscitation, then we have to do all the other things that might sustain life. So that's something when you're talking with your doctor or your nurse practitioner, you're going to want to talk about, well, if this happens, then maybe I don't want that. So if we try to start you back up with CPR, then we're going to intubate. Then we're going to do all the things for advanced cardiac life support. If you choose not to have cardiopulmonary resuscitation attempted, then you can choose selective treatment. That would be more geared toward keeping someone comfortable and maybe only going back to the hospital for certain kinds of situations. Or you could choose comfort-focused treatment where the goal of care is to have the person be very comfortable, have them enjoy whatever days they have left, be in the setting either at home or in their loved one's home, wherever the setting is that they want to be to spend their last days. And it allows for planning for comfort and making sure that people understand, I don't really want to go back to the hospital. I don't really want to have more antibiotics. I don't really want to have somebody pound on my chest for CPR. I want to be comfortable. And when Mother Nature, when Divine Providence says it's my time, then I would like to go peacefully and in comfort in the setting that makes me feel comfortable.
Yeah, my dad had that at 100.
How wonderful.
Yeah.
Oh, that's beautiful. That's beautiful. The POLST also talks about artificially administered nutrition and hydration. And again, there are situations where it might be totally appropriate for someone to have nutritional support, either with something called total parenteral nutrition, which is given through a wide bore IV or through a port, liquid, or maybe through an implanted feeding tube into the stomach. There's a variety of different ways this can be accomplished clinically. Maybe that's appropriate, maybe it's not, but this is a choice that people get to talk about, and that's part of the POLST. And then the signatures are very important. In order for this to be fully legal and actionable, it not only must be signed by the patient or their legal representative, but it must be signed by a licensed clinical professional, either a physician, a nurse practitioner, or a physician's assistant. And that's a really critical part. And that's really to ensure that these conversations have taken place, that the person who is signing the POLST as either the patient or the patient's representative really understands what all of these choices could mean. And that's also why the POLST is for people that are medically frail, that no one would be surprised if they died within the next year.
It all seems pretty overwhelming to have to fill out all of that, but you mentioned that there's an availability to get help online,
Sure.
or just a phone call, and have you walk somebody through that.
Absolutely. That's part of the support that we offer through the Hoag Palliative Care team. I probably, in the last 2 weeks, have walked through the POLST document with 10 different families.
Oh, wow.
And, really talked about it. We've had to do it by telephone because of COVID, but under normal circumstances, I'd be doing it personally. And sometimes a conversation like that takes an hour or more. Or you have one conversation, they think about it, they go home and sleep on it, and then a day or two later, you continue that conversation. So we want these to be undertaken with a great deal of thought and consideration, and nobody should be rushed. So once you've completed your POLST, now what? Well, the original is supposed to stay with the patient. That bright pink form should stay with you. And if you're living at home, magnet it onto your refrigerator so that if somebody calls the paramedics, they know where to look and they know how to read it. And this form has the seal of Emergency Medical Services in California. So it has been vetted and blessed all up and down the chain of command in our healthcare system. But make sure you make copies. If you're at an extended care facility, even if you're only going to be there a couple of weeks, have a copy in your chart. Maybe have them tape a copy to the back of your door or above your bed. That's also a good place for it. Because you never know. Somebody might come in and it's like guns blazing and they start CPR and then they look at the POLST form. So that's important. So keep it handy, but make sure that if you have electronic health record, many of our hospitals in the area have electronic health records. It can be entered in so that when you check into the hospital, it's flagged that that's part of your patient profile. That's important.
Is the advanced directive also something that would be part of my
It can
electronic
be, yes.
record? Because when I
Yes.
have checked in for surgery, I've always been asked, do you have one?
It could be a really great idea to just have it entered into your patient profile, and then it's there, and then they know who to call.
Oh, yeah,
if
that'd be
something
great.
happens to you. Exactly. This is an important point because people sometimes are under the incorrect impression that there is a hierarchy of next of kin in California, that if you're the patient's mother, you get to speak for them, or if you're the oldest son, you're the one who gets to make decisions. There's no such hierarchy in California.
Ooh.
So it's really important that you choose a surrogate decision maker, you write it down, and you have these instruments completed. Because otherwise it could be like ants on a rainy day. Nobody knows who's in charge.
So even for an 18-year-old, your parents are not it.
Not necessarily. If you've reached the age of majority, now chances are that's who the medical team is going to go to. But again, if somebody shows up and says, I'm his live-in lifelong partner and I've been in love with him for 6 whole weeks, they take that person's word. It's California. So here's a little comparison. So the advanced directive is for anyone 18 and older. The POLST is just for someone seriously ill, medically frail, and can be at any age. And perhaps we might consider it more so for people of advanced age. The advanced directive is general instructions, suggestions for things you would want. I don't want heroic measures. I don't want carnations at the funeral. I don't want to be buried at sea, or I do want to be buried at sea. Suggestions for the future. The most important job of the advanced directive is to name the person that speaks for you if you can't speak for yourself.
That's the part I did, yeah.
Absolutely. The POLST gives specific medical orders for current treatment that could happen today. Okay? And it can be signed by the decision maker. So if I have lost capacity either through injury or illness, advanced age, then my daughter, who is my agent as named in my advance directive, could complete a POLST on my behalf, so long as a physician, a nurse practitioner, or a physician's assistant also signs it. And again, these are really important documents. And just like any important documents in your life, your bank accounts, everything, we review them periodically. We review them when something big happens in life. So if there's a change in medical condition, if there's a change in marital status, if you move out of state, these are all really good triggers to cause you to dust off, take a look at these documents, make adjustments, perhaps complete new ones, and this review should happen at least every 5 years.
Ooh, 5 years.
Every 5 years, yes. That's kind of the minimum.
When we went looking to see if we had one of these, we discovered that the will we had filled out almost 20 years ago had it, but 20 years ago.
Right. A lot could happen in 20 years.
Yeah.
Great. Well, I really enjoy the opportunity to be able to talk about these things that I find so compelling and important, and that I find many, many families really benefit from having these documents in place, especially when there's a healthcare crisis.
Oh, that's wonderful.
So I appreciate the opportunity.
Well, I appreciate you doing it, Patty. Clearly, you know all the ins and outs of this, and you deal with it constantly in your job.
Pretty often.
You are the expert in this.
Oh, thank you.
So I hope that you will at least go to your internet and download a form to fill out an advance directive and either get your neighbors to sign it or get it notarized like I did, and then give a copy to everybody. And that's for health care, but you also need the one for finances. And I'm no attorney, so I can't tell you which form to use for that. I just found one on the internet. And then I also discovered that my bank wants me to fill out one of their forms. So you might kind of ask around. But when I actually got to doing it, the whole thing, even taking it down to the FedEx office and getting it notarized, really didn't take me more than about an hour. And it can be a real gift to everybody that you love and to yourself. So I hope you'll do it. Thank you so much, Patty.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us.